Autumn 1918, the Argonne Forest in northeastern France. This was a place of dense trees, deep ravines, and endless fog. The guns never stopped day or night, and the smell of mud and gunpowder hung between the broken trees. Deep in that forest, more than 500 American soldiers were trapped behind enemy lines. They had believed the units on either side were advancing with them. They were wrong. By the time they realized it, they were completely surrounded by German troops. Food, water, and ammunition were running out fast. Only the groans of the wounded filled the cold forest air. Their last hope was not a gun and not a radio. It was a single bird, no bigger than the palm of a hand. How could such a small creature, one that couldn't even hold a weapon, save lives in the middle of a war? Tonight, slowly, I want to tell you the stories of the animals who stayed by people's side on the battlefield. Lie back, get comfortable, and if sleep comes, just let it take you. We tend to remember the First World War as a war of steel. Machine guns and cannons, barbed wire and poison gas, all appeared together for the first time. It was a cruel age when human lives were counted only as numbers. And yet, even in the heart of that machine of war, there were living, breathing creatures. 100 years ago, battlefield communication still depended on a man's legs and a thin wire. Radios were big and heavy and broke down easily. A single shell could cut the telephone lines, and the runners carrying messages were often struck down. So the army turned again to its oldest allies, the companions humanity had kept by its side for thousands of years. Horses, dogs, and pigeons. They carried no weapons yet. They were pulled deeper into this war than almost anyone. Horses hauled the cannons and the supplies. Dogs carried messages and found the wounded. And pigeons crossed the skies, taking the place of broken lines of communication. No one ever asked them whether they wanted to go to war. They simply stayed by the side of the people who had taken them in. And there, side by side, countless animals lived and died alongside men. When the war began, the British Army had only 25,000 horses. But the war would demand far more than that. The Army had to gather 500,000 more, almost overnight. And so, across all of Britain, horses were taken by force from farms and villages. Farmers had to send away their most beloved workhorses and ponies, without so much as a goodbye. For some families, that horse was as good as one of their own. Children wrapped their arms around the necks of the leaving horses and wept. The requisitioned horses were led to the ports, loaded onto ships, and carried across the English Channel. What waited for them on the shores of France was a hell they had never seen before. And most of those horses would never return home. The horses had many duties. Some charged into battle with cavalry on their backs, but most simply hauled heavy loads. Moving cannons and ammunition, food and supplies across the mud was the work of horses alone. So was pulling the wagons that carried the wounded and bridging the broken roads. Where the trucks sank into the mud, the horses and mules pulled on in silence. And always beside them were the veterinarians and the soldiers. They washed the wounded. Horses treated their injuries and helped them rise again. Just to wash and groom a single horse could take 12 hours. Men and horses leaned on each other there in the mud. Among those countless horses, there was one whose name was remembered. He was a chestnut horse, born on a small island, off the south of England, the Isle of Wight. He had a white star on his forehead, and his name was Warrior. In August of 1914, he set foot in the French port of Le Havre, following his owner. His owner was Jack Seeley, a politician and a general, and a close friend of Winston Churchill. When the war broke out, Seeley went to the front with the horse he loved most. From that day until the war's end, the two of them spent 4 years together on the battlefield. Seeley later recalled that Warrior was a horse who knew no fear. Even as shells burst nearby, Warrior trusted his master and held his ground. The Western Front was hell for men and for horses too. The mud rose to the knees and the shells fell day and night. Warrior endured it all in silence. At the Marne, at the Aisne, and in the firestorm of the Somme, he survived. Once he was buried under the rubble of a collapsing building and was dragged out just in time. In the mire of Passchendaele, he was twice trapped in a burning stable and twice rescued. One day the horse standing right beside him was felled by a sniper's bullet, yet Warrior was unharmed. Beside the tanks at Cambrai, too, he held his place without flinching. General Seeley said that even when a shell burst right in front of him, Warrior would simply turn his head and watch the smoke. And from that calm, the soldiers themselves drew courage. The Canadian soldiers had a name for him. The horse the Germans could not kill. But Warrior was one of a very lucky few. Most of the horses fell not in battle, but in those terrible conditions: hunger and thirst, the freezing mud, and disease. When the feed ran out, the horses would even chew on the wet, blankets covering their own backs. One winter, the army ordered that the horses' coats be clipped short. It was meant to make grooming easier and to prevent disease. But that winter brought a record-breaking cold, and thousands of horses froze to death where they stood. More horses fell to the cold and hunger than ever fell to the shells. By the time the war ended, around 8 million horses and mules had lost their lives. They had no names and no graves, and in the middle of it all, only Warrior seemed fated to come home alive. Now let us return to Warrior's story, March 30th, 1918. A morning had dawned that would decide the course of the war. The German spring offensive had pushed the Allied line to the brink of collapse. If the Mareuil Wood was lost, there would be no holding back what came after. General Seeley climbed onto Warrior's back and stood before 1,000 Canadian cavalry. And then, toward a muddy hill, they galloped at full speed for half a mile. Above them, planes dropped bombs, and from all sides the bullets poured in. It was one of the last great cavalry charges in history. Warrior did not stop for a single moment. Behind him, 1,000 horses and soldiers climbed the hill. As the rainy afternoon faded, the Mareuil Wood was finally taken. Warrior survived, and the German advance was halted there. That Christmas, Warrior came home alive to the Isle of Wight. Of all the many horses who had crossed the sea with him, only a few ever returned to Britain. The fate of the war. Horses left in France was, for the most part, a wretched one. The 85,000 oldest horses were sold for meat, and hundreds of thousands more were scattered to farms. Of those countless horses, only a very few ever set foot on British soil again. But Warrior, having slipped past all that tragedy, returned to the fields of his island. He lived out a peaceful old age. On the very anniversary of his great charge, 4 years on, he even won a local horse race. Warrior lived to be 33 years old, added to the age of his master, Jack. Seeley, the two of them came to exactly 100. When Warrior passed away, an obituary ran in the newspaper. Its title read "The Horse the Germans Could Not Kill," and so the story of a single horse was written into history. Around that same time, across the ocean in America, another animal's story was beginning. The summer of 1917, on an athletic field at Yale University. This was where the 102nd Infantry Regiment trained as it prepared for war. One day, a stray dog came wandering onto that field. Because his tail was so short and stubby, the soldiers called him Stubby. Stubby soon blended naturally into the rhythm of the unit. He ran with the soldiers and slept beside them. One soldier even taught him how to raise a paw in salute. That soldier's name was Robert Conroy. The two of them soon became inseparable. On the day the unit shipped out for France, Conroy hid Stubby inside his coat and smuggled him aboard. On the ship, Stubby was finally discovered by a commanding officer. By the rules, he should have been thrown off right then and there. In that very moment, Stubby raised his paw and gave a crisp salute. The officer's heart melted, and with a laugh, he allowed the dog to stay with the unit, and so the little stray dog became the unit's mascot and went off to a real war. In February of 1918, the unit arrived at a front called the Chemin des Dames. The soldiers lived in Old Quarry, caves dug as deep as 30 meters underground. Above their heads, the shells burst without end. Even amid that terrifying noise, Stubby endured for more than a month. Just by being there, he gave the soldiers a comfort that reminded them of home. His first wound came not from a bullet, but from poison gas. Exposed to a gas attack one day, Stubby was sent to the rear to be treated. After living through that, his sense of smell grew even sharper. The men even had a small gas mask made especially for him. Even the faintest poison gas carried on the wind, he would sense before anyone else. One dawn, while the soldiers slept deeply, the gas crept in. Stubby barked and barked, waking the sleeping men and getting them on their feet. Because of him, many lives were saved from the gas. He could hear the shells coming before the men could, and would tell them when to take cover. When the shelling stopped, he went out into no man's land to stay by the wounded. When he followed a cry and found a fallen soldier, he barked until the medics arrived. In April of 1918, Stubby was badly wounded once again. Shrapnel from a grenade, thrown by retreating German soldiers, lodged in his leg and chest. He was rushed to a field hospital. Once he could move again, Stubby went from bed to bed, staying beside the wounded men. The presence of that little dog was, in itself, a great comfort to the soldiers. When he recovered, he returned to the front. One day, near the trenches, he spotted a suspicious man. It was a German spy, secretly drawing a map of the Allied trenches. The spy tried to run, but Stubby clamped onto his trousers and would not let go. He held on until the soldiers arrived and never released him. For this, it is said, he was promoted to the rank of sergeant. He was the first dog in military history to earn a rank through service. In the liberated town of Château-Thierry, the women there sewed Stubby a special coat, and all the many medals he received were pinned proudly onto that little coat. Having lived through 17 battles, he became the most decorated war dog of all. When the war ended, Stubby came home a hero. He met 3 presidents and led the front of countless parades. When Conroy went away to study law, Stubby was always right there beside him. He became the school's mascot, rolling a ball during games and making everyone laugh. In 1926, Stubby closed his eyes quietly in the arms of his owner, Conroy. His obituary ran longer in the papers than that of any celebrity of the day. And so the life of a single stray dog was set down in the record. Now our story returns to where it began, the Argonne Forest. In that forest, there was a single pigeon. But before we tell that bird's story, we must speak for a moment of the pigeon's war. People often think of the pigeon as an ordinary bird, but they had a remarkable gift. No matter how far away, a pigeon would instinctively find its way back home. They flew at 50 miles an hour and never lost their way, even in strange lands and through the smoke of battle. And so the pigeon became the most trusted means of communication on the battlefield. A commander would write a message, place it in a small tube, and the pigeon would carry it home to headquarters. Astonishingly, the success rate of messages carried by pigeons reached as high as 95%. This small bird was far more reliable than any radio or telephone line. The Germans feared these birds so much that their soldiers were trained to shoot the pigeons on sight. For to bring down a single pigeon was to stop the enemy's cry for help. The American forces had 600 pigeons, donated from Britain, and one of them is the hero of our story. That pigeon was already a veteran, having completed 12 missions on the Verdun front. On average, he had flown 19 miles in just 24 minutes. His name in French meant dear friend, cher ami. On October 2nd, 1918, around 550 American soldiers pushed through a gap in the German line. Their commander was Major Whittlesey, by trade a quiet lawyer from New York. They believed the French and American units on their flanks were advancing alongside them, but those units could not advance, and they alone were left deep behind enemy lines. They were surrounded on all sides. Food, water, and ammunition ran out fast. The groans of the wounded filled the forest, but there was not a single medical supply left. For 5 days, they held out against relentless attacks. The Germans sent a note urging them to surrender, but Whittlesey flatly refused. And in the midst of it all, something even more terrible happened. Their own artillery shells began to fall on top of them, a friendly fire born of mistaken coordinates. Shell after shell took the lives of their own men. Major Whittlesey staked everything on one last resort, to save the lives of his men. Several pigeons had already taken to the air, with messages, only to be shot down. Now only a single pigeon remained. With trembling hands, Whittlesey tied a note to the bird's leg. The note read, "We are along the road parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." The eyes of every soldier were fixed on that one small bird. Cher rose into a sky thick with bullets. The German guns turned all at once toward that little bird. His breast was pierced, he lost an eye, and one leg hung by a single tendon. He plummeted once to the ground, and in the moment everyone thought it was over, Cher rose again, painfully into the air. Bleeding, he flew a distance of nearly 25 miles. Through that desperate flight, not once did he stray from his path. On the single instinct of returning home, he cut across the sky. About 25 minutes later, Cher reached the loft. On his bloodied leg, the note still hung. He had collapsed onto the floor of the loft. Having guarded that message with his last strength, the men hurried to untie the message and read it. The message gave the battalion's exact position, and 3 days later, on October 7th, the survivors were at last rescued. Of the more than 550 who had entered the forest, 194 walked out on their own. A single small bird had opened the path for those 100. And 94 men. Cher survived. The army surgeon stayed up night after night to save him. His wounded leg in the end had to be removed. France awarded him the Croix de Guerre, and the soldiers carved him a small wooden leg to replace the one he had lost. General Pershing said that for this bird, nothing America could do would ever be too much. And when he sailed for America, it was that same General Pershing who came to see him off. But the following year, Cher finally succumbed to the wound in his breast. Now, let us return to the question we began with. How could a creature that couldn't hold a weapon save people's lives? The answer, perhaps, was very simple. Because he flew his own path, all the way to the end. Warrior Stubby and Cher, they never set out to become heroes. They simply did what they could for the people by their side. And beside them were millions more who never even left behind a name. The horses who fell in the mud, the dogs who held the trenches, the pigeons who dropped from the sky. They had no medals, no obituaries, no names to be remembered by. And yet each one of them saved a life and stayed by someone's side. Perhaps we are in debt to all those nameless creatures. Today, in Britain and in many other countries, there stand memorials to the animals who fell in war. And on one such stone are carved these words: they had no choice. But the animals' war did not end here. Some 20 years later, when an even greater war swept across the world, over a small village in Italy, the bombers were rising into the sky once more. And once again, a single pigeon took flight to stop that tragedy, just as Cher had done 25 years before in the Argonne forest. In the next story, we will meet the animals of the Second World War. For tonight, may you have a peaceful, restful sleep.